Hi there, Alison here with another Cab Franc du jour. Today we are in Chinon and we're looking at the Bernard Baudry 2020 Les Granges Chinon. This is one of several single lieu-dit wines that Bernard Baudry makes, and it's coming from vines in the commune of Cravant-Les-Côteaux. It's one of 3 wines that they're making from this commune, the other 2 being Les Grézeaux and also la Croix Boissée. There's also 2 other reds that they're making from vines that are in the Chinon commune, specifically their Domaine wine and also le Clos Guillot. So Les Granges, this is the lieu-dit, and surprisingly it's not a monopole for Bernard Baudry. In fact, it's a fair size, it's about 19 hectares, and there's several other vignerons that have parcels here. Now Bernard Baudry has a decent holding, about 8 to 9 hectares. It is their largest lieu-dit, and the vines were planted between 1985 and 1988, so we're dealing with sort of 35 or so year old vines, and they are all farmed organically. So where is Les Granges? We are on the right bank, the north side of the Vienne River. We're about 1.3 kilometers or so away, so quite close to the river, and we're sitting on a little bit of a knoll here. There's a stream that runs directly north of the site that sort of defines the topography a little bit of the vineyard, and as well we are kind of on a flatter site, and the vines are sort of planted with a nice southern exposure. Now the soils in this part of Chinon and Cravant-Les-Côteaux are known as the recent alluvial terraces of the Vienne. So there's 2 groupings of alluvial soils in Chinon. West of here in the Vineyard Peninsula, we see more alluvial terraces from the Loire River, and then here in Cravant-Les-Côteaux and a few other communes kind of along the Vienne River, we see more of these recent alluvial terraces from the Vienne River. So these are river-derived sedimentary soils that were deposited here via the flowing Vienne River during the Quaternary period. The texture of these soils, they're quite light, sandy, silty in terms of the texture. They're quite deep. Depending on the vineyard, there are some parcels that are a little bit more stony or gravelly in terms of texture. But here in Les Granges, we have predominantly a sandy, silty topsoil, and then the subsoil is also more of a sandier mix. Now, what's also interesting to note about this part of Cravant-Les-Côteaux is there are a number of streams and other tributaries that sort of weave in and around the vineyards, and they all flow into the Vienne. But as a result, because of all these sort of water sources, during the winter months, it's not uncommon for these vineyards to actually flood, for there to actually be some standing water in some of these sites. So the water stores are good. We're dealing with these good drainage in terms of the soils, but also we have these light, silty, sandy soils as well. So the combination of all these factors combined makes the fruit coming from this site, these sites I should say, not just Les Granges, but all of these sites that hug the Vienne in Cravant-Les-Côteaux, ideal for these fruitier, more early drinking styles of Cab Franc. And Bernard Baudry, in terms of the fruit, when they bring it into the cellar, they handle it just for this purpose. So we're talking shorter maceration time on skins, so 15 days max. The fermentation is done in neutral vessels with indigenous yeast, so a combination of stainless steel and concrete. And then aging is also in concrete vessels for about 7 to 10 months on fine lees before bottling. Now, this is my first Loire Valley Cab Franc from the 2020 vintage, so I thought it would be a good idea to kind of summarize the conditions of 2020 in terms of Cab Franc in the Loire Valley. So leading into the spring, the winter time was more mild and a little bit more wet than usual. Bud break was one of the earliest on records, which did pose a bit of a frost concern, but thankfully there was no frost damage in 2020, which was fantastic because the vignerons, of course, in 2017, 2019, and of course in 2021 had to deal with severe frost damage, which limited their yields. So thankfully in 2020 we had good yields going into harvest. Flowering was good. July and August were both warmer and drier than usual, but we did have some good water stores, thankfully, because of the winter and the spring going into these drier months. And there was some nicely well-timed rains in August and September to kind of make up for the dryness in July. So as sort of all in a whole, I would say that the harvest was a little bit ahead of schedule compared to normal. The quality looked good, yields were good. So all in all, as much as 2020 was a bit of a dumpster fire of a year for much of the planet, as far as Cab Franc is concerned in the Loire Valley, it actually looks to be a pretty good vintage so far, all things considered, at least in these early days. So let's look at the wine. Now the nose does show sort of hallmarks of a slightly warmer vintage for Chinon, so I'm getting some sweeter fruits as opposed to tartar, but the nose in terms of the profile is very pure, clean, a nice sort of ripeness of the fruit. I'm getting a little bit of cherry, there's a bit of blueberry here, maybe even a touch of pomegranate. But the wine does lean fruit forward or fruity as opposed to something that's a bit more earthy. The pyrazines are there, but they kind of take a bit of a back seat. I'm getting some nice dusty and fresh herbs, a little bit of foresty notes as well. But the fruit does kind of take the lead a little bit here, which I don't have a problem with at all. And actually the wine also has a really lovely perfume to it. There's a nice sort of violet note, which I quite like. I love when Cab Franc has that sort of violet punch to it. So really, really lovely nose. The fruits are confirmed on the palate, and the acidity is really nice and lively, but you do get the sense that the plushness and the ripeness and sort of the fleshiness of the fruit does sort of dominate the acidity a little bit, at least in terms of the wine's current evolution. I think with a little bit more time in the bottle, the acidity and the fruit are going to integrate a little bit better, and we're going to see a little bit more of sort of a pronounced acidity with a little bit of time. Yeah, there's a really good mouth-watering impact of the acidity, but there is this, you know, overt kind of fruitiness to the wine, which I think sort of mutes it a touch. The tannins are nice and velvety, and they do sort of have a breadth to them. They sort of sit horizontally on the palate. And there is a certain degree of openness to how the tannins feel in terms of that texture, which makes a lot of sense. As I mentioned, there is no impact of clay here. There's no impact of the limestone. And those two factors tend to sort of pull a wine in, make it a bit more vertical or linear, or a bit more compact, if you will. But because we're dealing with these light sandy soils, the sort of shorter maceration time, we have a tannin structure that's a bit more open, a bit more gauzy, a bit sort of broader in the mouth. And that makes a lot of sense. You know, this wine is meant for early drinking pleasure, and it's sort of designed to sort of be that way and to give you that sort of ease and drinkability and approachability. So there's no dryness to the tannins, no intensity at all here. And honestly, I absolutely adore this wine. It's one of my favorite in the Bernard Baudry range, and it's primarily because of this ease, this pleasure factor that it gives. There's a certain degree of friendliness, of companionability to this wine, and one of the reasons why I love Cab Franc so much is because it can do both. It can do these profound revelatory examples of these structured wines from these top sites, but at the same time it can make these reds that are kind of jovial, fun, comforting, easy, and just approachable. And I wrote a post sort of to this effect on this wine not too long ago, kind of a bit more of an emotional post that sort of talked to Cab Franc's ability to give pleasure and to give ease. And I think sometimes as professionals, we get a bit wrapped up in tasting wines that demand our attention, that are these profound examples of wherever they're from, whether it's a specific region or a grape. And Cab Franc can do this, but at the same time, it can also give us comfort when we need it most. It's like a nice hug from someone we know or someone we love, or a bowl of chicken soup when we're not feeling great. Cab Franc can do this. It can do the profound things, but it can also do comfort and pleasure as well. And it's one of the reasons why I love the grape so much, and one of the reasons why I absolutely adore this cuvee. If you've had any 2020 reds from the Loire Valley of Cab Franc, of course, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below. And of course, as always, I will be back again soon with another wine. Cheers.